All right, so let's start this. So thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts on ways that you might be able to improve your agency's process. Know that we all do this stuff differently. So what I might go through are things that you might be doing or even think you're doing better, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just going to share some ideas with you on my slides and give you some tips that range from everything from sales through to final delivery of your digital projects. Before we jump in, just want to share a little bit about myself. My name is Brett Harned. I'm the Director of Education at Team Gantt. I've got about 20 years experience working on and managing projects. 15 of those was spent in agencies like Razorfish and Happy Cog, where I was leading projects as a project manager for companies like Ben & Jerry's, MTV, Alaska Airlines, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and so many more. I also hired and led a team of project managers while I was at Happy Cog. After working in agencies, I spent about 4 years consulting with agencies and in-house teams on project management and operations. So I've got a pretty good understanding of how agencies of all types and sizes work. On screen here, you can see I wrote a book called Project Management for Humans that came out almost 2 years ago. And I've actually been a member of the Bureau of Digital team from the very beginning, and I founded the Digital PM Summit, which is actually happening in Orlando this October. So as you can tell, project management is my world, for better or for worse. And I'm looking forward to presenting to you today. So again, thanks for joining me, and let's kind of jump in. So what you see here on screen, this little process diagram, is essentially our legend for the session. First, I'm going to talk you through estimation, then kickoff, or really kind of the handoff from sales to the project team. Then we'll get into project process and finding efficient ways of working. Then we'll talk about accountability within that process and how to engage a team and clients to get work done on time. Lastly, I'll talk through project wrap-up and best practices for post-mortems. The goal here is definitely to provide some tips on several project touch points to help you to be more efficient with and more successful with your projects. But before we jump in, I want to give a quick overview of agency roles because I'm sure we all use different titles and team makeups. My experience, like I said, is mostly in the digital space, but I've worked with agencies who do a lot of other types of work as well. And these are the roles that I've seen in both large and smaller agencies. So leadership, obviously, these are the higher level management, sometimes just an owner. They're the folks who identify company goals and vision and champion the agency's work. In some cases, they work in business development as well as on projects. Business development, so these are the sales folks who are finding opportunities, selling capabilities to prospective clients. I've seen this done in teams, solo with one person, even as just a team effort. When I say teams here, these are the people who are producing the work, right? They're innovating, they're working with budgets under deadlines. These people could be strategists, designers, developers, production folks, project managers, are a part of the team as well. So PM and account are the last two. These are the two that are very, very different based on the agency size and the type of projects or clients that the agency takes on. So account folks are typically refining strategy for clients and building and maintaining relationships. PMs are typically responsible for overall team leadership. So they work with the team to facilitate staffing, plans, tasks, getting work done on time and within budget. And they sometimes take over account responsibility depending on company size and makeup. But I'm sure that there are roles at your company that aren't here, but these are the basics and essentially kind of who I'm going to be referring to in this session. So let's jump in and talk about the first process point, which is estimation in the sales process. So from my experience, I've seen this as a challenge for many agencies, and it's mostly because clients come to you with an idea that could be executed in a number of ways, right? So sometimes it's a matter of figuring out the best or preferred way and defining how you'll do that within a budget and on the timeline that the client stipulates with the people who are available, right? So that's a lot to consider. And I want you to know that I understand that estimating projects is not easy for a number of reasons, right? Teams and talent differ on projects. Our approaches to projects probably change over time. or from project to project. Sometimes we're not given enough information to create a good estimate, and the list can go on. But before you say forget it, you have to understand what an estimate is and why you should do them. So obviously, you know what this is. It's silly to put a definition on a slide, but for some reason, people tend to think estimates are carved in stone, and they never should be, because estimates aren't exact. They're guesses for what it could take to get something done. So I found that a lot of people working in agencies really just dislike creating estimates, and people have to create them, but sometimes they just don't value them, and they ask, why estimate? And I've worked with teams who say that estimating is not worth their time because they'd rather spend that time designing and coding. And as a PM, I get that. But there are some pretty specific and powerful reasons to create estimates, aside from the fact that you need to estimate a project to ensure it's going to be profitable. Some companies will just throw a number out to a potential client to see what sticks, and you can do that. But if you're not thinking about the associated scope that comes along with that cost, or at least some parameters of a project, you're at risk of losing profit and likely upsetting a team of people who want to do good work. So let's walk through some reasons to create good estimates. So if somebody says, we don't want to estimate, these are questions that you can say will be answered if you do estimate. So the first is the project worth it? Estimates help to calculate a rough determination of a cost, which can help decide whether or not the project's even worth your investment for you or for your clients. Most clients will look at a few companies to get competitive bids before hiring an agency, and sometimes they have a sense for a budget, but often they need you to tell them what it's going to cost or what you're going to do. When they receive estimates that are in really wide ranges, it's confusing because they don't know what they'd get. So being specific about what's included in your own estimate and scope can really help to justify your cost, or at least open up a conversation about what's actually needed and what a client desires. So next is, do we have the staff to take on the project? A good estimate's always going to be based on specific tasks and the talent used to complete those tasks. So your estimate's going to help you to staff a project properly. Just exploring what something might help you determine what something might be can help you determine if you have the right people on staff or if those people are even going to be available. Then it's, can we meet the deadline? Or do we know how long a project's going to take? You always want a sense for how long something's going to take to complete, because more complex projects can be dependent on other projects or tasks, and knowing just how long it'll take to complete your project might answer an important question about another project and when it may have to start or finish. Better yet, if your client wants to build something for an in-person event or announcement, will you have enough time to get that thing done? If not, you'll have to think through alternatives or maybe even turn the project down. Last one is, do we even want this project? Are we excited about it? You've got to have your team's investment in the project in order for it to be a true success. Let's face it, working within teams can be a challenge, particularly when there's disagreement or even poor morale on the project. But working together to produce an estimate can be a great way to pull a team together to talk about staffing, responsibilities, and timing. It also might be a good way to just do a gut check on how interested your team are to even approach the project. So a lot of thought goes into creating a solid estimate. And no matter what you do, you have to kind of understand the things that are here on screen. So what's happening in your industry and sometimes your client's industry, right? If you're trying to innovate or working on something new or an undefined thing on a project, it's certainly going to impact your estimate. Also, don't forget your collective team make this work happen. Not every work's in the same level, so be sure you understand how they work and their expertise. And be sure to check in on projects and understand the complexities of what you do well and what you struggle with. If you keep a log of work done and your experiences through retrospectives or postmortems and notes from those, or even have time logs from your time tracking system, you'll find a lot of detail to help you to get to better estimates. And before you jump into estimating, make sure you understand what it is you're actually estimating. Dig in on things like goals, metrics, politics, the needs of the project and the client, and potential risks. These are just some kind of sample questions you can ask stakeholders as you start to think about an estimate in the sales process. And then some more questions you can ask. And all of these are in my book. We'll also be sharing copies of these slides so you'll get them. But think about budget constraints, technology constraints or technology requests, timelines and requests on when things will be due, and just how involved your clients or stakeholders can be or plan to be in your project. Asking all of these kinds of questions are going to help you to get closer to an even better estimate. All right. So after you think through all of those things and have the necessary conversations, you'll be ready to take on an estimate. Just having foundational knowledge of why you need an estimate and the factors that impact them is important. So you'll want to create an estimate for the work that you're set out to do. I'm going to share some tactics that I've seen work in a number of agencies. But before I get started, I want to say you have to talk through things before coming up with actual numbers. Jumping into numbers right away means that you're leaving important information on the table and possibly money and time as well. So here are some things that you should kind of talk through. Goals. Like every project has to have a goal. If you identify it early on, you can use it as your wayfinding tool, not only to help formulate your scope, but to avoid the inevitable scope creep when the project becomes a reality. Some projects require research to uncover goals, but start with the business goals yourself and ask yourself, why does your client's business need the work done? And what should the outcome be? And how can you help them to achieve that goal? Then get more specific. What is it that you're actually creating, designing, or building? What's the intent and what should it do and why? If you have requirements, that's great. I always recommend creating at least a high-level requirements document. If you don't have something like that, start thinking about what those requirements might be and discuss them with your clients. You have to get granular on the what and the why so that you can figure out the how. I hope that makes sense. So a project deadline can create immediate constraints on process, deliverables, and sometimes even budgets. If you keep your team's availability, their expertise, and their experience level in mind, and you look at that through the lens of a budget, you'll be able to decide who's best suited for the project. And then always consider who you're working with, no matter what. As you're probably well aware, not all clients are created equally, right? Some folks get it, they're easy to work with. Others need a lot more attention and hand-holding. But diagnosing that early on can tell you how much that factor, how large your stakeholder team is. Will they require a lot of wrangling or even education and additional meetings? They're going to take time too. In fact, I usually think that the more people you add to a project, the more complex things get. It's easy to only estimate the tasks that you would do on a project, but remember to consider the amount of time you spend in meetings, on Slack, in email, or on the phone managing the people and the project. I see most agencies charging between 15 and 25% of the overall budget for project management. And it just all depends on how much attention your client's going to need. So do your best to ask some questions to start to figure that out. So those are all good discussion points. You might ask what the best way to have those discussions. I hear so many PMs complain about getting handed projects that were misestimated or oversold. So I always recommend that agencies create teams to estimate projects together so they can discuss how a project might work and come to an agreement on an estimate before a client even sees it. Simply talking about the variables that contribute to how you're thinking about an estimate will likely spark ideas about pricing, process, collaboration, deliverables, and probably some other things too. So if you work with a team and can get into a room to talk it out, I definitely think you should. I think estimating in the open is a great way of solving problems in advance of even seeing them on a project, coming up with new processes, and honestly getting to know one another in the way that you work well together. So when companies create groups who are responsible for estimating all projects, the teams might consist of sales and management or leads from departments. Some companies will pull in experts when needed, or even just pull in the people that they know who are going to work on the project. I say you have to do what's going to work best for your company or the people who are going to be in those meetings. Just keep in mind that the goal is to get a really well-rounded point of view of what the project could be, so that you can devise a more kind of reasonable plan for what the project will be and a reasonable estimate for what the work will be that you'll do together. All right, so let's get down to the how. If you think about steps and tasks that lead to deliverables and milestones, you'll find this pretty easy. I've got a traditional project management method in my toolkit. If you're familiar with PMI, you've definitely heard of this. I use this all the time, not only at work, but with home projects as well. It's called a work breakdown structure. Like it says on screen, it's a method by which you can visually represent the composition of a project by breaking down all project stages and aspects into their smallest possible components. So essentially, this method makes you think critically about all of the tasks and subtasks that make up your project. And here's an example of what those PMI traditional work breakdown structures look like. For us, because we're most likely doing some information architecture work, this tends to look like a sitemap. And for me, that makes it a little bit confusing. And you don't have to use this format. In fact, I have adapted it. I'm a PM, so I tend to like lists. And this is my example of a work breakdown structure for creating wireframes on a project. So I broke the process down into 3 steps or phases. Those would be in purple: brainstorm and design, present, and finalize. You can see I added tasks under each, along with an hourly estimate for each. That allows me to tally up all hours based on tasks expected. You also know that I've added tasks like client approval that don't necessarily require my time. This is just to have an overview of the whole process. It's nice to do this because it sets an expectation about the steps you'll take and the scope of your project as you kind of get through the estimate and then start working through a plan. So this is my example. Sorry, I'm showing you, I forgot I had these transitions in here. So I've got the total time for all of the hours there for all of those phases. And those are basically my draft kind of estimates for what it'll take to do this work in an overall plan. So what it comes down to is that you just have to break every larger task down into subtasks to truly understand the level of effort of maybe a task or a phase, depending on how you do your work. It just makes it easier to translate things that might seem big and unmanageable into small, manageable, and sizable tasks. So most scopes have an estimate to back them up. What you see at the bottom of the screen is a screen grab from a Google Doc estimate that I created. This is essentially a work breakdown structure done in a different way. I've listed the roles for the project along the top with the tasks along the left. So you can go through this, plug in hours, make sure your formulas work, and you essentially have a work breakdown structure and an estimate for every task, as well as a full project budget when you do that. You can also create an estimate within your plan. So this is actually a screenshot out of Team Gantt, where you can basically go in at the task level, make resource assignments, and also add task estimates for budgets. So you can create a plan and estimate at the same time, whether it's to create a new project estimate before a kickoff or on the fly just to sort out details in the sales process. You can do it this way as well. I can definitely see using a tool like Team Gantt or other project planning tools as a way to create an initial plan and an estimate using this kind of feature. The thing about doing that is when things get started on a project, they can change. They can even change before a project starts. You all know that. And you want your team to agree on a plan once you get into the project. But since plans always change, having this kind of solid starting point can be nice if that's how you want to work. All right. So it says seems easy, right? I know it's not that easy, but hopefully the tactics here are going to help you to tackle larger projects and break them down. And if you get stuck, you should do these things, right? Ask questions. For some reason, PMs are afraid to ask questions. But your team and your colleagues should be able to offer insight And a prospective client can usually offer a lot more info with some questions. But don't be nervous about being transparent about what you don't know, because that's going to help you when you actually work on the project. You'll gain trust, you'll learn more, and you'll deliver what the client needs within a budget if you just take the time to ask some questions. Also, dig deep. Nothing is high level when you create estimates like this. Think through those tasks and think through the subtasks that need to get done in order to complete them. And then, of course, look back on similar projects and what they were like and if they were on budget or not. And if you aren't tracking project histories through retrospectives or logged hours in a time tracking system, you should definitely start doing that. And then the last note here is, obviously, remember it's just an estimate. I'm a big fan of, when you're starting a project, setting an expectation with a client about the plan and the estimate, saying, we created an estimate based on what we knew at the time. There is a chance that some new feature or idea or even a business goal will pop up somewhere along the line of the project. So let's be open about our scope and know that it's my job to control the scope on the project. Same thing goes for the plan. Things could change based on the way that you're working. The process could not be working, and it's going to be up to you as the PM or the project lead to set the course right no matter what when things go wrong. Set that simple expectation, and conversations will be a lot easier for you when those issues do pop up. All right, so that covers my estimating points. Here are some high-level recommendations for creating better estimates, and really this isn't dependent on a methodology. I also want to mention I've written extensively about creating estimates. What you're seeing here in this presentation is a short version, so check out Project Management for Humans. I also have a new online course that I'm doing with Team Gantt. It's called The Art and Science of Leading Projects. It's a 14-video project management course, and you can find it at teamgantt.com or even on YouTube, I think, if you search my name or Team Gantt. All right, so let's talk through another painful process point for a lot of agencies. That's kicking off, right? I'm sure you've dealt with this kind of scenario, right? That the client tells your sales team that they're hiring you, everyone gets excited, and then it takes a month to get the contract signed. When that's done, the client wants to start the project ASAP. They probably wanted to start it weeks ago. So the sales team dumps the scope and the project onto the team, and they move on to new sales because that's their job. But the team's left wondering, what should we be doing here? What got us to this point? It's not a fun scenario, and unfortunately, a lot of us end up in that scenario. So we'll talk through ways to kind of get through it. So sorry, I had to take a sip of water. This must start ASAP way of working leaves the team with tons of questions. But you always want to start quickly, because if you don't, the clients are going to get upset. But you don't want to start off on the wrong foot. And you can start off on the wrong foot if you take too long to start the project. You can also start off on the wrong foot if you rush it and don't know what you're getting into. And it's going to annoy the project manager or account person because they're lacking detail or context that they need to comfortably get started. So I'm going to talk through some process improvements that will help you to transition from sales into a project. All right, so here's one place to start. Have your sales team set the expectation during the sales and contracting process to let clients know you need some time to assemble teams, to onboard them to the project, and to get started. When I worked for HappyCog, we always put this into our contracts, and we'll get projects started within 2 weeks of a contract signing. That afforded us time to figure out staffing plans, educate the team on the project, and then schedule introductions. And when I said educate the team about the project, I meant spending time to get them up to speed with the project in a handoff meeting. So the goal with a meeting like this is really simple. It's to get the team comfortable and informed with the project, and to transition ownership from business development to the project team. An important note about this meeting, which I think should be organized and facilitated by the sales team or the person who has basically led the lead to a sale, is that sharing all relevant info like the scope document, of course, any kind of briefs or background information for the team to review in advance of the meeting is critical. Giving people the time to digest and understand documents and formulate questions in advance of a meeting will make the meeting run more smoothly, and it'll make people happier because they feel like they've been given an opportunity to think about the work before just jumping into it. So here's some more information on that meeting, or a possible agenda for you. I would say the meeting should be an hour to 90 minutes long, and you should rely, again, on the sales team to share docs like the scope, provide an overview of key conversations that shaped that scope, discuss project goals, and talk about who the stakeholders are, what they do, and what they've been like to work through the sales process. That's an important thing too. You want to know what the relationship could be like, or what possible risks or tricky situations might lie ahead. Then I think that there should be some open discussion and Q&A with the team. I found that this meeting has a lot of benefits, especially because of that Q&A. It gets the team engaged and also makes them understand what sales does. I think, unfortunately, a lot of teams don't look up to sales in the way that they should. Sales is an important function of every agency, and it's a really busy job. So we have to have a little bit of empathy for that. And this kind of meeting kind of lets a team in on that. It also motivates the team to be kind of more accountable to the rest of the team and to the project, because they're given an opportunity, hopefully, to be a part of the estimating process. But if not, they've been given an opportunity in this meeting to ask questions, review documents, and do all of that before the work was just dropped on them. Okay, so then there's another meeting that you might want to consider adding to your process. It's not the full project kickoff. I know a lot of us do kickoff meetings or workshops with clients, but this is more of a way to introduce the project manager or account person who'll be working directly with the client. Or even just the one client contact. Essentially, you're transitioning the relationship to the next person in the line at the agency. And doing this in a way that doesn't just kind of go through email will ensure that you're starting off on a positive note and covering all of the details together. I found that this makes clients feel like you're organized and ready to work and thoughtful about how you communicate with your partners and clients. It's a really good way to build relationships and set solid expectations for how you're going to work together as well. I think that's a really good benefit of this. If you're constantly thinking about building relationships, I think projects become a little bit easier. And here's some notes, just like with the last one, how I'd run this meeting. I do think this one can be pretty short, about 30 minutes. And the person who sold the project or interacted with the client should introduce the new project lead on that call. From there, you'll talk about the team who's going to take on the project and what the work is going to be like. And you'll also review the scope together. I always recommend reviewing scope together because the contracting process can be kind of brutal, especially if legal gets involved. There's a good chance that your client isn't always aware of the final scope. And I know that I've been a victim of that scenario. You want to be sure that nothing was cut or added that they're not 100% aware of. No, I'm not saying that you should read the scope line by line together, but a high-level review of what you'll do combined with a reiteration of the goals is always a good thing. You should always talk about how you'll communicate as well. Will there be status reports? How often will they come out? Who should be a part of the status meetings? How will they be brought into the tools that you're using, and how do you want to use those tools? Get through that stuff so that they don't get confused, or worse, go rogue and keep emailing the salesperson. That's going to be the most unproductive thing that can happen for you early on in a project. And of course, you're going to end every meeting with next steps. And for this one, you're probably going to start talking about scheduling and planning. So remember, focus on the client relationship early on to ensure that things run smoothly, but also have someone as a backup or a check-in. So when bigger issues come up, clients can speak with someone outside of the project as needed. That can be a sales or account person, a general manager, or even an agency owner. Your client should always have a second person to go to if there are concerns or issues. All of these things, I think, should ensure a smooth transition, one that's going to make everyone comfortable, and hopefully it's going to lead to great client collaboration and hopefully project success as well. All right, so next I'm going to talk about actual project process, like how we get things done. I'm going to say that in the past 5 years or so, Agile has become an industry buzzword. Many agencies want to say that they're agile because that means they're doing things faster and being more profitable. No, I don't think that's the case. Agile is a pretty strict process that many agencies can't take on fully, because Agile with a capital A imposes lots of rules and doesn't always work well with clients, especially the ones who are really slow to respond or just disappear, or if they've got 50 people on a stakeholder team. But on the other hand, waterfall is really kind of too slow. So what do? We're going to jump in here and look at process a little bit further so you can start to make some good decisions and call your process what it really is. And honestly, it's not likely that it's really agile with a capital A, just saying. All right, so it's a fact that we do things differently. As individuals, as agencies, as teams, we're always doing things differently. And no project is made the same, right? They can be complex with differing goals and audiences. They can definitely have different scopes, budgets, teams, and obviously stakeholders. So there's no way we can manage all projects the same way. Plus, there are a variety of documented methods to research and study. So we all pick what we think is going to work for us. And that's okay, because we're all learning from one another. I know in my own career, I've pulled ideas and tactics from one client or industry or project and applied them to another with varying levels of success. And I think that you should do that too. But you should also think about what the basis of your method is. How do you work and why is a really important question. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to talk about 3 types of methods that are common among teams working on digital projects. And I'm sure that you know this stuff, so I'm not going to go super deep on this. But here are the first 2. I'm sure you're familiar with them, like I said, and I've already mentioned them, but Agile means go fast. Well, maybe. It's definitely more iterative and flexible. Waterfall is the one that at this point in time in 2019, people are sticking their nose up at it, right? It's slow and it's far less collaborative. But the problem with these 2 ways of working is that, surprise, they don't work for everyone for a variety of reasons. Because neither work completely, in many cases, a lot of agency teams are crafting more hybrid models for their projects. A lot of teams are taking the best of both worlds and making a new process that produces new products with a sense of agility and collaboration, but also falls back on deliverables or milestones and allows for formalized stakeholder feedback. And that's so important to what we do as agencies. Some call it Agifall, others call it Agifail when it doesn't work. But let's take a look at how all of these methods work really quickly. So Agile isn't a process as much as it is a set of values and principles. Scrum is one way of acting on the Agile values and principles, and it focuses on close collaboration and iteration. It requires teams to be dedicated to one project, which can be very difficult to make happen in an agency setting. And it really doesn't recognize the role of the traditional project manager to handle the details. Ideally, in Agile methods, self-organizing dedicated teams work together with a product owner based on stories that they've developed to ship functional pieces in sprints, what you're seeing here on screen in sprints. This allows them to deliver quickly, gain feedback, and then enhance continually, which is important to Agile. It works really well for internal teams who can control the outcomes of a project. Not as much for agencies who are producing work for clients. So some agencies will tell you that they're making it work with the right clients and projects. My hunch is that they're doing more hybrid work. So the waterfall model means that you get one step done to hand it off for the next step to build on it, right? Teams work in their disciplines, which kind of end up being silos, which is a downside. And it's typically the PM's job to keep everyone on time and under budget and communicating at the same time, because it's a process that's full of starts and stops, approvals and handoffs. I think mostly waterfall works well for large projects with a lot of dependencies, less so for short-term projects that require really quick turnaround. And I'll say less and less people are working this way. I think the last time that I actually saw a waterfall process document was about 12 years ago when I was working for Razorfish, and we were still working waterfall back then. I'm sure they've changed since then. All right, so like I said, More people are combining processes like Agile and Waterfall to create workflows that work for their teams, for their clients, and for their projects. That kind of blending of methods has been really widely accepted as what they're calling a hybrid process now. Now, of course, there are more processes than Waterfall and Agile. Obviously, there are a ton of them. They just happen to be the most referred to in our digital project management community. But next, I'm going to talk through a couple of hybrid examples and show some process diagrams for how you can kind of combine Agile and Waterfall. And again, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, you might be doing this stuff completely differently. But hopefully checking this out will give you some ideas. All right, so this would be a project that is a website redesign, let's say. This example starts with research prior to a kickoff. A lot of agencies will do some user and stakeholder interviews to understand project goals, challenges, and stakeholders, and at the same time to collect requirements. That's the stuff that you can't necessarily do in a sprint. I mean, I guess you could, but it's hard to constrain stakeholder interviews to a sprint when you're dealing with a number of stakeholders and their busy calendars. But from there, you define the work in a brief, jump into a pretty agile process where you do all the work in sprints, typically 2 weeks at a time. At the end of the sprint, the team will demo the work, and that would be design and development included, as well as UX and content. You'll demo the work to clients to get their buy-in or approval. I'll say this definitely requires a pretty flexible client, one that can make decisions independently and quickly and is comfortable with delivering in increments. So I would say if you're doing this, it does require a fair amount of client education. So you might see some design sprints to start, or maybe the team will just jump right in and do design and code at the same time. It's really dependent on the people who are working on your team and how you prefer to work. Depending on the scope, they'll complete a number of sprints before launching a project and then continue to iterate it on the project afterwards. This is important when you're thinking about web development, right? Starting with a beta and building on that to continuously improve the product. So thinking more like a product than a project. This is just one way of doing it, but also note the meetings in the left-hand quarter that I think are utilized in these processes. They're based on Scrum process with some client engagement interjected to keep communications open and going. So the stand-up is a daily meeting that I'll cover in a few minutes. The sprint planning is an activity to determine what work will be delivered over the course of your sprints. And you would build a backlog of tasks or stories that need to be taken on over the course of those sprints so that you can track that work. We'll talk more about retrospectives as well, or post-mortems, but these help you to course correct and are really important in Agile because they help you to iterate and to get better as a self-organizing team. I've had agencies tell me they're Agile, but they actually don't do retros. And if you're one of those, you're not Agile. So don't say you're Agile, because Agile is really dependent on using all of those ceremonies. So the last thing is status updates, and they're important no matter the process that you're running. If you're not delivering regular status reports and conducting meetings to review the work and what's coming next, along with risks that could be there, you should start doing that as soon as possible. And I'm going to share more on that soon as well. All right, so here's another way. It's a tad more waterfall. It starts with research and project definition, then leads to some waterfall-like work with defining a design and getting a client approval before building a site or an app. So the circle here is just the development work done in sprints leading to a final approval and a launch. Of course, this could lead to more iteration. It just depends on how the project is scoped. So I hope those two examples were either close to what you're doing or spark some ideas about how you might be able to work on future projects. I'm a really big fan of the hybrid process because it is very flexible. So I do want to just share some of the benefits here. First, less time on documents means higher profitability, right? It also requires a little bit of trust between you and your clients. Second, decisions being made quickly is a huge benefit, but again, you do need a client who's able to do this, who's able to make quick decisions. The minute they lag, your plans are going to fall apart, and that becomes difficult. When you're able to stack work and be more agile, you can get work done more quickly, and when clients comply, that obviously helps. The last one here is all about collaboration, which is something all teams should aspire for, I think. the more you can get a team to collaborate on and discuss work, the stronger the outcome is going to be, and the happier the team and the clients are going to be as well. So of course, there's always challenges to consider. When you're working in sprints, it'll require more of your team's attention throughout the project rather than in intervals due to kind of like more waterfall-like handoffs. So that can sometimes create resourcing challenges that you have to consider. Second, sometimes people don't know how to collaborate and might be up to you to document some best practices or rules on collaboration. And that's something that I think all agencies should definitely think about. When you work more hybrid, you have less deliverables for review and approval as well. So you need to be really clear about what's going to be up for review or change and when. You know, clients are typically used to being consulted at every turn, so you might need to do some extra education to keep them in tune with how your project's going to work and what deliverables, actions, or even their inaction might mean. Lastly, when you're more agile, you have to rely on really good communications because things move and change really quickly. So you'll need a good framework in place to ensure transparency and timely information sharing. So no matter how you choose to work, these are the things that I think you need to consider. The expertise and interests of your team, how your stakeholders or clients prefer to work and their expectations of the work, or how they'll be able to kind of work with you, and what you need to get done and how much time you have to do it. I hope that this has given you a kind of a good primer for these processes. If you want to learn more, you can refer to the Agile Manifesto for the principles of Agile, or check out a variety of resources online or on your bookshelf. I also do a free presentation at Team Gantt about how to crack the process code, I think is what I've named it. It gives kind of a setup for questions to ask and scenarios to consider when you're building your own hybrid process. So check that out if you want to see. All right, point 4, probably the most difficult and most common issue that a lot of agencies face. And probably the question that I hear most from project managers. How do I motivate a team member? Or how do I get somebody to meet deadlines? Now, you can have a great estimate, what you think is a really solid plan, and even a really good relationship with your team members and your clients, and things can still fall apart because people don't stick to their commitments. And trust me, I'm a PM, I know that it's frustrating. But I think that if you're facing accountability issues with your team or clients, the place to start is with transparency and information sharing. If you set the expectation and provide a place to share info openly with your team and with your clients, you'll find that people open up. You'll get more questions, you'll hear more opinions, and you'll get more input, which can be frustrating at times, but it's a good place to start because creating an open dialogue about your work and the project that you're going to work on will make people feel more accountable to sharing details with the team. But of course, people are always going to stay up late, try to make a deadline and then miss it, right? For a variety of reasons. They could be professional and personal. That's kind of not even the point. The point is you have to deal with the situation accordingly and hope that you know the deadline that's going to be missed, you know about it in advance of the day it's going to be missed so that you can course correct and at least reset expectations. But here's the million-dollar question, who's missing the deadline? Because it's not always a team member that you have to deal with. In my experience, clients tend to cause bigger project delays than agency teams. And this tends to cause downstream issues for the agency when it comes to things like cash flow, resourcing, and even new business efforts. So I'm going to talk about how to manage and set expectations when it comes to timelines with teams and clients. So first, it starts with your team. And sometimes with your company, you know, if you don't have any policies around missed deadlines, you should think about them. For instance, are there any repercussions if someone misses a deadline? Or does the PM just have to deal with it when a deadline's missed? Personally, I think that's the worst. One rule that I've seen implemented in the past is that if a team member misses a deadline, they're the one who has to reach out to the client and explain why. I love that because no one likes a difficult conversation, and team members always tend to think that PMs won't take on the difficult conversation and we have to do it all the time. But why should you have to do it on behalf of someone else all the time when they're making mistakes. It's too easy to dump that kind of stuff on a PM. And when you don't allow that, people get more responsible. I'm also going to talk through the last 2 points here, how to use a RACI matrix and best practices for stand-up meetings. So when you're planning projects, you have to be clear about the fact that everyone has specific assignments. You're there to help them meet commitments, but not to babysit them. PMs are not babysitters, right? That means they need to be responsible for taking tasks on and following through on time, or at least communicating early when things feel like they're going off track. It can be rough, but it's up to you as a team lead to communicate the details and follow up on them to ensure everyone's kind of in the know about what's happening on the project. So the RACI matrix is what you're seeing here on screen. It's a really great tool for aligning teams and stakeholders on commitments and for keeping people accountable to their work, and even just their general involvement for the course of an entire project. Especially, you know, I've worked on projects where someone might be a part of the team, but they don't work on it until the very end. But you still want to keep them engaged. All right, so what you see here on screen is essentially the format for the tool. This is a more visual example that I pulled from an article that I wrote, but you could very easily do this in a spreadsheet. In fact, that's what I recommend. Essentially, you have to list your team members and maybe even your stakeholders along the top as columns, and then all of your tasks and milestones on the left as rows. And as a group, you can sit down and rank everyone's level of responsibility or role on the task level using the RACI setup. So as you can see on screen, R stands for responsible. Those are the people who are responsible for doing the work. Accountable is basically the person who signs off on the work, or the person who's going to get in trouble if the work doesn't come through, or will have to answer to someone if something is bad. C is for consulted. Those are basically the people who need to consult on or contribute to the work at some point. And then I is for informed. So those are the people that probably aren't working on it, but they should know. They're a part of the team. They should know what's happening. I love the RACI matrix. I think this is a really great way of sorting things out, particularly when you're working on multidisciplinary teams with several of the same role. Just figuring out who should be doing what, who's responsible and accountable, can really help you to clear up any confusion and set the right expectation on your projects. All right, so here's some information on stand-up meetings, which I also mentioned earlier. I think these short meetings can be really helpful in keeping your team accountable. It forces everyone to communicate about the work that they're doing, so it keeps everyone honest. And I think at the same time, it also builds trust. Plus, it can force some FaceTime or social interaction, which I think we need sometimes just to break the tension, or even just to get to know people that you're working with better. So I really like stand-up meetings. The reason it's a short meeting is because this is all you have to cover, right? Essentially, you'll go around the group and each person will provide this update. This allows you to gauge kind of what's happening or not happening and follow up on issues after the meeting. That's an important note. Like in the meeting, you're gonna go around the group, everyone's gonna state what they worked on yesterday, what they worked on today, and what blockers or issues there are. You'll talk about those blockers or issues afterwards. I also should note that I have yesterday and today listed here, and I just said that. You could easily be kind of since our last meeting or until our next meeting, if you want to do these every other day or weekly. The goal is just to keep everyone in the loop on progress and blockers, and you need to fit these into your team's schedule and within your project budgets. But remember, you can include them in your early estimates if you're thinking about that in your process early on. Stand-ups are going to help with accountability, communication, and getting work done. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about clients and accountability. First, in order to ensure a client will be accountable, you have to make sure they understand what they'll be responsible for and when. That typically happens early on, maybe in that handoff meeting or when you deliver your plan that outlines the steps of your project. But make sure that you're doing these things. First, be sure that your clients understand that projects require partnerships. That's important. You might want to clearly define their role and tell them what will be needed from them and when. This can be done in a sales meeting early on, but definitely should be done when you're kicking off, just to reiterate it. The more you can be clear about that expectation, I think the less issues that you'll face with clients. Also remember that as a project manager or a project lead, you're part educator. And actually anyone who is on an agency team is part educator. Keeping your clients engaged in what's happening and informed about what's happening will help you to get a project done faster. So take the extra time to teach them about your work, your team, your process, and anything else that they have questions about. Leave that door open all the time. And of course, you have to share your plan, but just don't do it one time. You have to do that every time there's an update to your plan so that your clients know what's happening at all times. Last, here's the status report, which I have more on. So let's talk for a minute about status reports. I think it's a good practice to keep an open, consistent line of communications with your clients. When you deliver status reports and conduct regular status meetings, you're basically ensuring that the expectations you established in the beginning of your project with a really well-crafted plan and a scope are consistently reviewed and reaffirmed as you proceed through the delivery of the final product. So status reports as regular check-ins can also give you an opportunity to build a relationship, which can be really valuable when you hit rough patches in your project. It's always good to have clients on your side, right? So be sure to make time to talk about non-project things when you're in these status meetings, when it makes sense, of course, but find some common ground like hobbies and interests and make small talk. The only reason I'm mentioning this, it might feel a little out of place, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because as PMs focused on getting projects done, we tend to want to be all business and formal, but going a little bit off script can help you with communications in the long run. Because when you've built a business relationship that's based on trust and really comfortable, friendly conversation, it makes the more difficult news easier to swallow. Plus, you're just human, right? We're all humans. We just have to find ways to connect with one another. So think about that. So a good status report's basically a document that supports your formal plan and scope. I always recommend doing weekly or bi-weekly reports for stakeholders, depending on the size of your project, of course. But essentially, I see the status report as a critical form of communication that keeps everyone, your stakeholders and your team included, honest about project details. A good status report covers the work that's recently been done and highlights what's coming next. By outlining that, you can kind of set expectations about what's complete and what will absolutely not be revisited on your project, and look at what's coming next and have conversations or even educate your stakeholders about how next steps are going to fit into the overall process. I think a regular status report also includes an overall update on your timeline % complete, which you can pull right from your plan, as well as a budget update if you report on budgets. I think it's just as important to include next steps and action items in your status report so you can be 100% sure that all parties are accountable for their tasks. Lastly, I recommend using a status report as your own way of tracking possible issues and initiating a more open conversation about those risks before they become big issues. This is a part of the status report that I think requires more transparency than a lot of people are comfortable with. And it definitely requires some critical thinking on your part. Obviously, you don't want to scare your clients, but if you see a potential issue, you document it and discuss it, because talking through an issue is going to help to resolve it quickly. It also sets a really firm expectation that you're there working on the project, doing your best job to make sure things run smoothly. Okay, so a little bit about routines. You can get your status reports on a schedule by essentially scheduling a call to review the report with your stakeholders. This is going to keep you accountable to getting work done every week. And the bonus in doing that is that when you write a status report, it forces you to check in on all of the aspects of your project, what I like to kind of call the admin work. So you'll update your plan and look at upcoming tasks and milestones. You'll work through to-dos, make sure that that's all been noted and people are aware of their tasks. And then you'll check in on your budget too. So it's kind of the stuff that you have to do when you're running projects, but we all know that that kind of stuff often gets pushed to the side. So get in a routine and you'll always kind of rest assured that you're up to date and that so is everyone else that you're working with. So feel free to grab this free status report template that I created over at Team Gantt. The URL is super long. You will get a copy of these slides. And you can also just Google Team Gantt status report and you'll find it that way too if you can't grab that. All right. So just one final point in this section. Communications are important when it comes to keeping a team and a client on track. Sometimes a communication plan can help with that because you define how and when you'll communicate and to whom. That sometimes feel a little too formal for agency folks, and I think that that's totally fine. You don't have to do a communications brief. I would just say that you should make communications intentional, clear, and often, and that's going to help you to keep everyone on track. All right, so that brings me to the final process point in the presentation. You end a project and quickly move on to the next one, leaving basically no room to talk about process, what worked, and how you can do better. Most agencies do this, and you absolutely should not. You should focus on ending projects with grace and a process so clients feel comforted in the fact that the work that you did was good and that they'll come back to you when they have more projects. You also need to take the time to reflect on how the project worked for you and learn from the mistakes or missteps that might have happened along the way. So I know that I've been there. You want to wrap up a project because a new one's scheduled to start right away. So you rush through and push a project out the door and forget to wrap it up with a client. And that's never good. You have to make sure your clients feel good about the work and that they're actually ready to end the project with you. I mean, what if they have more work for you and you're rushing to just close them out? A lot of times we forget about that. So here are some tips for wrapping up projects with clients gracefully. First, make sure your clients are prepared to end the project, especially if they have to assume the work. They have to take over the website or the app and the updates. If you don't train them, you'll get a trickling set of questions for months on end or until they break something, right? And then after you do that, you can send a short, friendly communication that basically says the scope has been met. So you can make it formal enough to end it, but also just be open to those trickling questions. And maybe you can even set the limit of time that you will take to answer those questions. You know, I've seen agencies say, you know, after a month of launch, we'll take questions. Beyond that, we'll set up a new scope of work. But from there, you just have to be sure that you have an organized way to hand over files and archive your communications so that you can set your clients free, feeling like they worked with a thoughtful, helpful partner. That's really important because it's recommendations that get us a lot of our work. So keep that in mind while you're wrapping things up. You're not kicking clients out the door. Like I said, many of us do not take the time to learn from our own work, but if you can just take a couple hours to talk about it, you'll find ways to improve your process, your collaboration, the way that you create estimates, the way you communicate, and definitely how profitable you are on those projects. So here's my recommended process for running effective post-mortem meetings. And yes, I know some people hate the term post-mortem. Call it whatever you want. I don't care. I'm calling it a post-mortem. I recommend doing a quick whiteboarding session to document what worked and what didn't work. From there, you collect your key thoughts and put them into a discussion guide or some slides, and then schedule about a 90-minute meeting to talk through those points with a focus on directing the conversation to solutions or next steps, and making sure that you're assigning those next steps to people on the team who will address them. Remember, it's not all on the PM. It's a pretty straightforward meeting in terms of process, which is why I just went over it pretty quickly. But I think where it can get tricky is with the personalities. So you should definitely develop some kind of guidelines to cover at the top of the meeting. You have to position this as a positive learning experience, not a finger pointing session. But in order to do that, focus on what went well before you dig into what didn't go well. And be sure you make it an inclusive environment where everyone gets the chance to share their opinions. If you're in this meeting and you notice that someone hasn't spoken, ask them if they have anything to add. And then at the end, you should have a full set of marching orders to take on after the meeting. But most importantly, you need to make sure you follow up on these meetings to make sure people follow through and make the changes you've committed to. Another issue I've seen in many agencies is that post-mortem findings just don't get shared with the whole company. Remember that any project learnings can help your entire agency, not just the team that you were working with. When I was at HappyCog, I managed the team of PMs, so I was kind of a part of all projects. And I developed a post-mortem process where I was the one to facilitate those meetings, and then the shared key findings or outcomes or even the next steps or changes that happened after those next steps were communicated by me in a regular all staff meeting. So just that's all to say, think about ways that you can share information and push your agency to change for the better. All right, so that brings us to the end of the process points. I hope you're finding all of this helpful. Just want to do a really quick recap before I wrap up. So first, develop a system to collaboratively create more realistic estimates. Pull people in who are doing the work. It's going to get them better at estimating their time and then more accountable at doing that work when it comes to it. And then hold your sales team accountable for helping to transition your project. Remember that your sales folks, they do a lot of great work. They also mine a lot of great information in that sales process. So make sure that you're getting that information because you can use it when you're in the project. Then when it comes to process, test methods on your projects. Remember when I said you can set an expectation that your process might change? Process is always going to change depending on the project that you're working on. Try new things and be open to changing and making mistakes, and you'll always get better. Then create communication routines to develop stronger teams and client accountability. If accountability and morale and motivation is an issue for you, I hope some of the points that I mentioned here are going to help you. Lastly, learn from your projects and continue to get stronger. That kind of goes hand in hand with changing process. You can always get better as you learn. All right, so thank you so much for joining. If you have follow-ups, you can reach out to me here. My email address is brett@brettharned.com. I'm also at Harned@Bureau of Digital. And find me on Twitter @BrettHarned. Last thing, most important thing to me, I cannot end this thing without mentioning that our 7th annual, can't believe it's our 7th annual Digital PM Summit is happening in Orlando, October 20 to 22nd. We've announced a lot of speakers already, so check out digitalpmsummit.com. I'll actually be presenting a workshop on process and teams, and we've got a lot of awesome speakers and topics for people at all levels in PM. One more thing, early bird tickets end today, so grab your ticket today if you want to save 150 bucks. But again, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you joining me this afternoon, and I'm just 1 minute over an hour, so not too bad. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.